I'm going back to my ex-lover, my wife said after 14 years. I never really loved you. I just nodded. The next day, her own lawyer called with a broken voice. The house, the accounts. My God, what did you tell her yesterday? You know what they say about marriage? It's like a house of cards built on a foundation of lies, good intentions, and shared Netflix passwords. Well, my 14-year house just came crashing down faster than a drunk college kid trying to build IKEA furniture, and all it took was 3 little words and one criminally overcooked piece of fish. Let me set the scene for you, because this moment deserves the full cinematic treatment. Picture this. Our dining room, the one Clara insisted we paint Tuscan sunset, even though it looked more like baby food orange to me. The table's set with the good china. You know, the stuff that only comes out when someone's either getting engaged, divorced, or dead. I should have seen the writing on the wall right there. But hey, hindsight's 2020, and I was busy trying not to choke on what I'm pretty sure was the driest salmon in the history of seafood. Clara's sitting across from me in that blue dress. The one I bought her for our anniversary 3 years ago when I still thought romance meant something more than remembering to put the toilet seat down. She's pushing her food around her plate like she's performing surgery, and I can tell something's brewing. You develop a sixth sense about these things after being married for over a decade. It's like a storm warning system, except instead of tornado sirens, you get passive-aggressive sighs and the sound of silverware being stabbed into innocent vegetables. So there I am, sawing through this piece of fish that could probably be used as a doorstop, when Clara sets down her fork with the kind of deliberate precision that means business. She leans forward, and let me tell you, when your wife leans forward during dinner, it's never to tell you how handsome you look in fluorescent lighting. I'm going back to my ex-lover, she says, just like that. No preamble. No. Honey, we need to talk. No gradual build-up that would have given me time to brace for impact. Just boom. Nuclear option deployed. I never really loved you. Now, here's where most guys would lose their absolute minds, right? Flip tables, throw plates, maybe punch a wall and immediately regret it because drywall hurts way more than it looks like it should. Clara's sitting there with this expectant look on her face, like she's waiting for me to audition for the role of devastated husband in her personal drama series. But you know what I did? I nodded. That's it. Just a simple, calm nod, like she'd just told me it might rain tomorrow or that we're out of milk. I even folded my napkin. You know, that neat little triangle fold they do at fancy restaurants that makes you feel like you're supposed to tip extra just for the geometry. The confusion on Clara's face was absolutely priceless. I'm talking about the kind of bewildered expression you see on people's faces when they try to use a rotary phone for the first time, or when they realize the movie they've been watching for an hour is actually a foreign film and the subtitles were turned off. She'd clearly been practicing this moment in the bathroom mirror for weeks, probably rehearsing different versions of her big speech depending on how I reacted. She wanted the full Broadway production, tears, screaming, begging, maybe some dramatic declarations about how she was the love of my life, and how could she do this to me? She wanted me to fall apart so she could feel important, so she could be the star of her own breakup story. Instead, she got me sitting there like I was mentally composing a Yelp review. Service was mediocre, salmon was overcooked, wife's confession lacked originality. 2 stars, might come back if they improve the fish. What Clara didn't realize, what she couldn't possibly have known because she'd stopped paying attention to me somewhere around year 7, was that the show she thought she was starring in had just been canceled. Not postponed, not moved to a different time slot, but straight up axed by the network. See, here's the thing about being married to someone for 14 years. You learn their patterns. You start to notice when they're texting more, when they're suddenly interested in going to the gym, when they start buying new underwear that somehow never makes it into the regular rotation at home. You notice when they start working late more often, when their stories don't quite add up, when they start picking fights over stupid stuff like whether the dishwasher was loaded correctly or if I remembered to move the laundry from the washer to the dryer. Clara thought she was being subtle, but subtle to Clara was like whispering to a deaf person, technically quieter, but missing the point entirely. I'd been watching this train wreck build up steam for months, maybe even longer. The late-night phone calls she claimed were her sister, the mysterious errands that somehow took 3 hours to complete, the sudden interest in finding herself and exploring her authentic truth, whatever the hell that meant. So when she finally dropped her bombshell, I wasn't shocked. I wasn't devastated. I wasn't even particularly surprised. I was actually kind of relieved that we could finally stop pretending. It's exhausting, you know, acting like everything's fine when you both know the ship is sinking. It's like being in a really boring play where everyone forgot their lines, but keeps going anyway because the show must go on. But here's what Clara didn't know, what she couldn't have possibly suspected as she sat there waiting for me to crumble like a stale cookie. I'd been preparing for this moment for a long, long time. While she was busy planning her dramatic exit, I'd been quietly building something she'd never see coming. The salmon might have been overcooked, but revenge? That's a dish best served cold, and I'd been letting it chill in the freezer for months. If you've never had the pleasure of watching a grown woman throw a tantrum while packing, let me paint you a picture that would make Jackson Pollock weep with envy. Clara didn't just pack that night, she performed. And brother, it was a performance worthy of a Razzie Award. The show started around 10:30, right after she'd called her mother to dramatically announce her liberation from a loveless marriage. I could hear every word from downstairs because Clara had apparently forgotten that sound travels, especially when you're practically shouting into your phone like you're trying to communicate with astronauts on Mars. Her mom, bless her heart, was probably wondering why her daughter suddenly sounded like she was auditioning for a soap opera. But hey, family therapy isn't my department. Then came the real entertainment. Clara stomped up those stairs like she was trying to wake the dead, or at least the neighbors 3 houses down. Each footstep was a declaration of war against gravity, a percussion solo that would have made Buddy Rich jealous. I'm sitting in my recliner, remote in one hand, beer in the other, thinking this is better than cable. Who needs HBO when you've got your soon-to-be ex-wife providing live entertainment? The first suitcase hit the bedroom floor with a thud that rattled the windows. Now, we're talking about a regular Samsonite here, not a grand piano, but Clara managed to make it sound like she was moving a safe. Then came the drawers. Sweet Jesus, the drawers. She wasn't opening them. She was assaulting them. Each one slammed shut with the force of a small earthquake, like she was personally offended by the existence of furniture. But the real showstopper was the sighing. Clara had elevated the art of the exaggerated sigh to Olympic levels. We're talking about sighs that could power a small wind turbine. Sighs so dramatic, they probably registered on the Richter scale. Every 30 seconds, like clockwork, SIGH. It was like listening to a deflating balloon convention. Around 11, the phone call started. And not just any phone calls, speakerphone calls. Because apparently, Clara wanted to make sure I could hear every gory detail of her romantic reunion planning. Enter Simon, the man of the hour, whose voice sounded like what would happen if sandpaper decided to take up karaoke. Seriously, this guy sounded like he'd been gargling with gravel and chasing it with cigarettes for the better part of 40 years. Baby, Simon croaked through the speaker, and I swear to God, I nearly choked on my beer. Baby? This woman is 42 years old, has crow's feet, and considers yoga pants business casual, and this drain-clog Romeo is calling her baby? I've been waiting for this moment for so long. We can finally be together like we were meant to be. Clara's response was peak teenage drama. Oh, Simon, I should have never let him convince me to stay. I wasted so many years. The way she said it, you'd think I'd held her hostage with a gun instead of, providing a comfortable middle-class lifestyle and remembering her birthday most years. But here's the kicker. While she's up there having her emotional breakdown, I'm downstairs doing math in my head. See, Clara never was great with numbers. Hell, she couldn't balance a checkbook if it came with instructions and training wheels. So when she started talking about what she was going to take with her, I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. The suitcase symphony continued for another hour. More thumping, more sighing, more speakerphone conversations with Simon that made me want to invest in noise-canceling headphones. At one point, she dragged what sounded like our entire closet across the floor. I'm pretty sure she was trying to pack clothes that haven't fit her since the Clinton administration. But hey, optimism is a beautiful thing. Around midnight, Clara made her grand entrance into the hallway. She'd changed into what I can only describe as her revenge outfit. You know, the kind of get-up women wear when they want their exes to realize what they're missing. Tight jeans that were doing their absolute best under challenging circumstances. A top that was about 2 sizes too optimistic, and enough makeup to supply a small theater production. She stopped right in front of me, suitcases flanking her like loyal soldiers, and delivered what she clearly thought was her mic drop moment. Guess I'll finally get half of everything. The smirk on her face was something else. It was the kind of smirk you see on people's faces right before they realize they've been punked, or right before they find out their lottery ticket is a fake. She was practically glowing with self-satisfaction, like she'd just solved world hunger and discovered the secret to eternal youth all in one night. I just leaned back in my doorframe, crossed my arms, and watched her savor what she thought was her moment of triumph. In my head, I was already 3 moves ahead, playing chess while she was still trying to figure out checkers. Half of everything? Oh, sweet Clara. Half of what you think exists. The thing is, Clara had this adorable habit of assuming she understood things without actually reading them. Like when she signed our post-nup agreement back in 2016, she just scribbled her name on the dotted line because I told her it was just standard paperwork to protect both of us. She never bothered to read the fine print, never asked what specific clauses meant, never wondered why I was suddenly so interested in legal documentation. She thought she was getting half of a house, half of our savings, half of our investments. What she didn't realize was that she was holding monopoly money and thinking she'd won the lottery. The house, already transferred to Morris Holdings LLC 3 months ago when she started staying out late with girlfriends. The car, company fleet vehicle as of last week. The savings account she was so excited about. Well, let's just say Simon's about to find out his sugar mama is actually on a strict financial diet. But I wasn't going to spoil the surprise. Not yet. Clara was so busy starring in her own little drama that she hadn't bothered to check if the theater was even open. She was performing Shakespeare to an empty house, and the reviews were going to be absolutely savage. So I just stood there, watching her drag her life away in mismatched suitcases, listening to her make plans with a guy who sounded like he'd been smoking since birth, and thinking about how sometimes the best revenge is just watching someone dig their own grave with a smile on their face. You know that moment in movies when the villain finally reveals their master plan, and the hero realizes they've been played like a fiddle at a bluegrass festival? Well, picture that. Except I'm both the villain and the hero, and Clara just drove off into the sunset thinking she's won the lottery when she's actually holding a handful of toilet paper. The Uber pulled away from our driveway at exactly 12:47 a.m. Yes, I checked, because timing is everything in this business, and revenge is definitely a business. Clara's silhouette was visible through the rear window, probably texting Simon about how she'd finally escaped, and how they could start their new life together. If I squinted, I could almost see the cartoon dollar signs floating in her eyes. Did I cry? Did I pour myself a stiff whiskey and stare dramatically out the window like some broken-hearted protagonist in a Nicholas Sparks movie? Hell no. I went straight to my study. You know, that room Clara always called my boring paperwork dungeon because it wasn't decorated with throw pillows and inspirational quotes about living, laughing, and loving. The black box was waiting for me on the shelf, sitting there like a patient predator. Not literally black. It's actually a sleek silver fireproof safe that cost more than Clara's car payment. But I called it my black box because, just like on airplanes, it contained all the important data that would matter when everything went to hell. I pulled out the laptop. Not my regular one, mind you, but the special one that Clara thought was just my work computer. She had no idea this particular machine was connected to more accounts than a Swiss banker's Christmas list. One click, and I was logged into the Morris Holdings LLC portal. Another click, and there was our house, officially transferred from Michael and Clara Peterson to Morris Holdings LLC as of 3 months ago. Clara always thought my obsession with paperwork was just another one of my weird quirks, like how I alphabetize the spice rack or insist on folding fitted sheets properly. She'd roll her eyes whenever I brought home another legal document, another contract, another form that needed signatures. More boring business stuff, she'd say, signing wherever I pointed without reading a damn word. She thought the binders were my version of stamp collecting. She thought the safe was just me being paranoid about identity theft. She thought all those late-night phone calls with lawyers were about my consulting work. What she didn't realize was that I'd been quietly building a fortress designed specifically for betrayal, and she'd been helping me stock the ammunition. The beauty of it was in the details. See, when you've been married to someone for 14 years, you learn their patterns. You know that Clara signs first and asks questions never. You know she trusts you to handle the boring stuff because numbers make her head hurt and legal jargon puts her to sleep faster than NyQuil. You know she'll agree to anything if you frame it as protecting our family or planning for the future. So when I started talking about asset protection 3 years ago, Clara was all for it. When I explained that transferring everything to an LLC would save us money on taxes, she practically pushed me toward the lawyer's office. When I suggested the post-nup was just to update our financial planning, she signed it while watching Real Housewives and eating ice cream straight from the container. With another click, the car was officially tagged as a company fleet vehicle. That little BMW she loved so much. The one she thought was going to be part of her fresh start. Company property now, complete with GPS tracking and usage monitoring. Imagine her trying to explain to her insurance company why her birthday gift suddenly belonged to a corporate entity with more paperwork than the Pentagon. The bank accounts were next. Joint accounts? What joint accounts? According to the documents Clara signed in 2016, everything transferred to me automatically upon abandonment of the marital relationship. That's legal speak for running off with your ex-boyfriend, in case you're wondering. Our savings, our investments, even that little emergency fund she thought she was so clever hiding in her maiden name, all of it now flowing through channels she didn't even know existed. I leaned back in my chair, cracking my knuckles like a pianist preparing for a concert. The screen showed account after account, property after property, all neatly transferred and legally bulletproof. Clara thought she was getting half of everything. She was getting half of nothing, which, last time I checked, still equals nothing. But I'm not completely heartless. I left her the Netflix account. I mean, I'm cold, not cruel, and everyone deserves access to true crime documentaries and British baking shows. Besides, she was going to need something to watch while she figured out how spectacularly she'd miscalculated. The credit cards were an interesting case study in selective reading. Clara had been using the joint cards for months, building up what she probably thought was marital debt that we'd split down the middle. What she didn't realize was that those cards were tied to accounts that became solely mine the moment she decided to play house with Simon. Every romantic dinner, every new outfit, every little gift for her boyfriend, all charged to cards that were about to become her personal responsibility. I pulled up the spreadsheet I'd been maintaining, call it my infidelity expense tracker. $237 at Victoria's Secret 3 weeks ago. Lingerie I'd definitely never seen. $185 at that fancy restaurant downtown, charged on a Tuesday when she told me she was working late. $89 at the florist, flowers that never made it home. The best part? She'd been documenting her own affair with our joint credit card. It was like watching someone write their own conviction letter and then hand it to the prosecutor with a bow on top. I clicked through a few more screens, double-checking the legal framework I'd spent years constructing. Trust documents, LLC operating agreements, property transfers, beneficiary designations. All of it interconnected like a spider web designed to catch exactly one very specific fly. Clara always said I was too methodical, too careful, too obsessed with having contingency plans for my contingency plans. She was right, of course, but she never understood that being methodical isn't a character flaw. It's a superpower, especially when you're married to someone whose idea of long-term planning involves checking the weather forecast. The laptop screen reflected my face as I closed the final window. 23 years of marriage preparation, 14 years of marriage, and about 6 months of divorce preparation, all culminating in this moment. Clara was probably curled up with Simon right now, planning their future with money that existed only in her imagination. Morning came like a gift from the revenge gods, complete with sunshine, bird songs, and the sweet satisfaction of knowing that somewhere across town, Clara was probably waking up in Simon's arms thinking she'd pulled off the heist of the century. Little did she know she'd actually just handed me the smoking gun, wrapped it in a bow, and posed for pictures with it. I was sitting at my kitchen table in my house, drinking coffee from my favorite mug, when I decided to check social media. Now, I'm not usually one for scrolling through Facebook at 7 in the morning, but something told me Clara might have some announcements to make. Call it intuition, call it knowing your enemy, call it whatever you want. I call it Christmas morning. There it was, posted at 11:47 p.m. the night before, a picture that was worth more than 1,000 words. It was worth about $500,000 in legal damages, but who's counting? Clara and Simon, clinking champagne glasses in what looked like some upscale restaurant downtown. Her smile was radiant. His looked like he'd won the lottery, and the timestamp on that photo was about to become the most expensive selfie in relationship history. The caption read, "True love always finds its way back, red heart, hashtag new beginnings, hashtag real love, hashtag finally." I nearly spit coffee all over my laptop, and not because it was bad coffee. I was laughing so hard I started choking. The timestamp, "You beautiful, incriminating piece of digital evidence." 8:23 p.m. Let me spell that out for you. 8:23 in the evening. On the same day, Clara would later claim she'd made a spontaneous decision to leave me during our anniversary dinner. Our anniversary dinner started at 9:15. Clara was toasting her true love an hour before she even sat down to tell me she never loved me. She was celebrating her escape while the salmon was still swimming around in whatever farm-raised hell it came from. This wasn't a sudden revelation during dinner. This was premeditated relationship homicide, and she just posted the murder weapon on Instagram for the world to see. I screenshotted that photo faster than a teenager trying to capture celebrity drama before it gets deleted. Then I screenshotted the metadata, the timestamp, even the location tag that showed they were at Romano's, the same Romano's that was about 6 blocks from our house, where Clara had been running errands for the past 3 months. But wait, it gets better. Because as I'm sitting there marveling at Clara's spectacular ability to self-destruct, I noticed something else in the photo. Simon's wearing a watch I'd never seen before, a shiny Rolex that definitely wasn't in his collection when he was married to his first wife. And Clara? Clara's sporting a new necklace that looks suspiciously expensive for someone who's been claiming we needed to tighten our budget lately. I zoomed in on that photo like I was analyzing the Zapruder film. That necklace had to be worth at least $2,000, maybe 3. And unless Simon had suddenly struck oil or won the lottery, I was looking at jewelry that had been purchased with marital funds. My marital funds. Clara hadn't just been cheating. She'd been funding her affair with our joint credit card and then posting evidence of it on social media. This was like watching someone rob a bank, live stream the getaway, and then tag the FBI in the video. I mean, I'd seen people make bad decisions before, but Clara was setting new standards for spectacular self-sabotage. I pulled up the post-nup agreement. You know, that boring paperwork Clara had signed while binge-watching Netflix 3 years ago. Article 9, Section B, Subsection 2. Any evidence of premeditated abandonment, including but not limited to romantic involvement with third parties prior to official separation, shall constitute grounds for total forfeiture of marital assets and property. Premeditated abandonment. That's what the lawyers called it when someone plans their exit strategy while still playing house. And thanks to Clara's need to document every moment of her life like she was some kind of relationship influencer, I now had ironclad proof that she'd been planning this spontaneous decision for months. I forwarded the screenshot to my lawyer's office with a subject line that read, "Early Christmas present." Then I sat back and wondered how exactly I was going to explain to our daughter that her mother had essentially signed her own financial death warrant with a champagne selfie. The beautiful thing about social media is that it's forever. Even if Clara deleted the post, which she wouldn't, because she was too busy basking in the attention from her friends commenting things like, "You go girl," and "about time." I had the screenshots. I had the metadata. I had evidence that would make Perry Mason weep with joy. I started scrolling through Clara's recent posts, because why stop at one piece of evidence when you can build a whole case? 2 weeks ago, girls' night out, with a photo of her and her friend Michelle at a bar. Except Michelle wasn't in the photo. Simon was, sitting in the background trying to look casual, while Clara posed with a cocktail that probably cost more than most people's lunch. 3 weeks ago, treating myself because I deserve it, with a picture of shopping bags from 3 different stores, all charged to our joint credit card, all on a day when she told me she was visiting her sick aunt in Riverside. Aunt Patricia, by the way, had been dead for 2 years. The evidence kept piling up like snow in a blizzard. Clara hadn't just been cheating. She'd been creating a documentary about it, complete with timestamps, location data, and financial records. It was like she'd confused adultery with influencer marketing and decided to build her brand around betrayal. I scrolled down to the comments on the champagne photo. Michelle had written, "Finally, I was so tired of keeping this secret LOL. You two are perfect together." Followed immediately by, "Oops, don't out me, haha, delete this face with tears of joy. Don't out me." Those 3 little words were worth their weight in gold. Michelle wasn't just a friend who knew about the affair. She was an active participant, a co-conspirator who'd been helping Clara cover her tracks for months. And now she'd just admitted it in writing, on a public platform, with her real name attached. I leaned back in my chair and finished my coffee, savoring both the flavor and the moment. Clara thought she was starring in some romantic comedy where the misunderstood woman finally finds her true love. What she'd actually done was create a legal thriller where she played both the defendant and the star witness for the prosecution. If you've ever watched one of those legal dramas where the hotshot lawyer walks into court wearing a $1,000 suit and an attitude that could cut glass, you'll appreciate what happened next. Clara had apparently decided she needed professional representation for her little gold-digging expedition, and boy, did she pick a winner. Tyler Preston called me at exactly 10:30 a.m. because apparently even divorce attorneys have to schedule their intimidation tactics around coffee breaks. His voice came through the phone like he'd been practicing it in the mirror for years, smooth as aged whiskey, confident as a poker player holding 4 aces, and fake as a $3 bill. "Mr. Peterson," he purred, and I could practically hear him adjusting his cufflinks through the phone. "My name is Tyler Preston, and I represent your wife in this matter. I'm calling as a professional courtesy to inform you that we'll be seeking equitable division of all marital assets." Equitable division. I had to give him credit for the fancy terminology. It sounded so much better than, "we want half your stuff," which is what he actually meant. This guy was clearly billing by the syllable. "I assume you've retained counsel?" Tyler continued, and I could hear papers shuffling in the background. Probably shuffling his lease agreement for that BMW he couldn't actually afford, but hey, image is everything in the legal world. "Not yet," I said, keeping my voice as neutral as Switzerland during wartime. "I'm still processing this whole situation." That was Tyler's cue to launch into what I can only describe as his intimidation speech. You know the type. Lots of legal jargon designed to make regular people feel stupid and scared. He threw around phrases like substantial settlement, aggressive litigation, and protecting my client's interests like he was auditioning for a role in a John Grisham movie. "Now, I understand emotions are running high," Tyler said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. "But I want you to know that my client is prepared to be reasonable. We're not looking to leave you destitute, Mr. Peterson. We simply want what's fair." Fair. That's a funny word coming from a guy representing a woman who'd been planning her exit strategy while charging romantic dinners to the joint credit card. But I let him talk, because sometimes the best strategy is to let your opponent think they're winning while they're actually digging their own grave with a golden shovel. Tyler kept talking about Clara's contributions to the marriage and her right to financial security, and how they were prepared to negotiate in good faith. It was like listening to a used car salesman explain why that 2003 Honda with 200,000 miles was actually a steal at 15 grand. "I see," I said when he finally paused for breath. "And I assume you've reviewed all the relevant documentation?" "Of course," Tyler replied, and I could practically see him straightening his tie. "We've conducted a thorough analysis of the marital assets. My client has provided me with comprehensive financial information." Comprehensive financial information. From Clara, the woman who thought a budget was something other people worried about, and who had once asked me if we could write off our vacation because it was educational. I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. "Well then," I said, "I suppose I should send you the complete file so you can review everything properly." That's when I did something beautiful. I opened my laptop, pulled up the folder labeled Clara's Greatest Hits, and started attaching documents to an email. The post-nup agreement with Clara's signature on every page. The LLC transfer documents she'd signed while watching The Bachelor. The trust formation papers she'd initialed during a Netflix binge session. The champagne selfie with timestamp metadata. The credit card statements showing purchases at Romano's every Tuesday for 3 months. Michelle's incriminating Facebook comment about keeping secrets. But the crown jewel was the bank surveillance footage I'd requested 3 weeks ago, showing Clara and Simon together at the ATM, using our joint account to withdraw cash for what the timestamp revealed was the same day as their romantic champagne celebration. Clara depositing checks made out to both of us into an account Simon had access to. The whole beautiful, incriminating parade of evidence that painted a picture clearer than a 4K television. I attached it all to one email and hit send. The subject line read, "Complete financial documentation as requested." Tyler must have been expecting the usual collection of bank statements and property deeds that come with a standard divorce. What he got instead was a legal nuclear bomb with his client's fingerprints all over the detonator. I waited and waited. The silence stretched out like a bad suspense movie, and I could practically hear Tyler's brain processing what he was looking at. 6 minutes and 37 seconds of beautiful, perfect silence while Clara's hotshot attorney realized his client had just handed him a case that was less slam dunk and more slam into a brick wall. When Tyler called back, the smooth confidence was gone. His voice cracked like a teenage boy asking someone to prom, and I swear I could hear him loosening his tie. "Mr. Peterson," he stammered. My God. What did you tell her yesterday?" "The truth," I replied, savoring every syllable. "I told her the salmon was overcooked. You could have heard a pin drop." Tyler was probably staring at his computer screen, watching his easy payday evaporate faster than water in Death Valley. He was looking at evidence so comprehensive, so ironclad, so perfectly documented that even a first-year law student could win this case. The truth," Tyler repeated, and I could practically see him rifling through papers, probably looking for some loophole, some technicality, some Hail Mary pass that might save his client from complete financial annihilation. "That's right," I said. "The truth about the salmon, the truth about her affair, the truth about the champagne celebration she posted on Instagram an hour before our anniversary dinner, and the truth about every forged signature, every hidden transaction, and every lie she's told in the past 6 months." The line went quiet again. I imagined Tyler calculating how much money he'd already spent on this case versus how much he was likely to collect when it was over. The math probably wasn't working out in his favor. "Mr. Preston?" I said after a moment. "Are you still there?" "Yes," he croaked, sounding like he needed a very strong drink. "Yes, I need to consult with my client." "Take your time," I said cheerfully. "But you might want to suggest she finds a good therapist instead of a good lawyer. Because at this point, the only thing she's going to be dividing equitably is her debt payments." Click. If you've ever wanted to witness someone's entire worldview collapse in real time, might I suggest watching your soon-to-be ex-wife try to access bank accounts that no longer acknowledge her existence? It's like watching someone try to use a VHS tape in a Blu-ray player. Technically, they're both movies, but good luck making that work. Clara marched into First National Bank at exactly 2:15 p.m. on Thursday, 3 days after her dramatic exit, and probably about 48 hours after Tyler Preston had delivered the bad news about her legal prospects. I wasn't there personally, of course, but I had friends in low places, and Thomas the bank manager owed me a favor from when I'd helped him refinance his mortgage through my consulting contacts. According to Thomas, Clara strutted through those glass doors like she owned the place, which was ironic considering she was about to discover she didn't own much of anything anymore. She was dressed in what I can only assume was her "I'm a serious businesswoman" outfit. You know, the kind of get-up that screams, "I watched Legally Blonde and thought it was a documentary." She walked straight up to Jennifer, the poor teller who had the misfortune of being on duty during Clara's financial awakening. Jennifer was one of those sweet, grandmotherly types who probably knitted scarves for stray cats in her spare time and had never dealt with anything more dramatic than someone depositing a check upside down. "I need to move some funds from our joint account," Clara announced, sliding her ID across the counter like she was making a drug deal. "I'm closing it out and opening a new account for myself." Jennifer smiled that polite bank teller smile and started typing on her computer. Then she stopped, squinted at the screen, typed some more, stopped again. The smile was starting to look a little strained around the edges. "I'm sorry," Jennifer said, her voice carrying that special tone people use when they're about to deliver news that's going to ruin someone's day. "I don't see your name on this account anymore." Clara's reaction was apparently something to behold. According to Thomas, her face went through more expressions than a mime having a seizure. Confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally that special kind of rage that only comes from realizing you've been outplayed by someone you thought was too boring to tie his own shoes. "Check again," Clara demanded, her voice shooting up about 3 octaves. "It's a joint account. My name is Clara Peterson, and that account has been joint for 14 years. Poor Jennifer, bless her heart, checked again, and probably a third time just to make sure she wasn't missing something. But the computer doesn't lie, and the computer was being very clear about who owned what. That's when Thomas made his entrance. Thomas Williams, branch manager extraordinaire, who looked like he should be directing a church choir instead of dealing with financial meltdowns. He approached Clara with the kind of calm, professional demeanor that came from 20 years of dealing with people's money problems. "Is there an issue I can help with?" Thomas asked, probably already knowing the answer, but following bank protocol like the good soldier he was. Clara launched into her explanation about joint accounts and 14 years of marriage and how there must be some computer error because this was impossible. She was gesticulating wildly, her voice getting higher and more frantic with each word. Other customers were starting to stare, probably wondering if they were about to witness their first live bank robbery. Thomas nodded sympathetically, asked for her ID, and disappeared into his office. He came back carrying a manila folder that might as well have been Clara's death certificate, because it contained documents that were about to bury her financial future 6 feet under. He sat Clara down at his desk, you know, the one with the fake wood grain and the motivational calendar that nobody actually reads. Then he opened that folder and pulled out papers that had Clara's signature all over them like a teenager's yearbook. "Mrs. Peterson," Thomas said in that gentle voice he probably used to tell people their loans had been denied. "According to these documents, you transferred all rights to this account to your husband in 2016. The transfer was conditional, activating upon abandonment of the marital relationship." He slid the papers across the desk, and Clara stared at them like they were written in ancient Sumerian. Her own signature was right there, clear as day, next to clauses that spelled out exactly what would happen if she decided to play house with someone else. I don't understand," Clara stammered, which was probably the first honest thing she'd said in months. "This can't be legal. I never agreed to this." Thomas, ever the professional, pointed to her signature, then to the notary's seal, then to the date, which was definitely from 2016, back when Clara thought legal documents were just another form of homework she could ignore. "I'm afraid it's all properly executed and notarized," Thomas explained. "These were filed with the state and have been in effect for several years. The account transfer was triggered automatically when you established residence elsewhere." Established residence elsewhere. That was banker speak for shacked up with your boyfriend. But Thomas was too polite to put it in layman's terms. Clara's face went through another series of expressions, this time settling on something between nausea and disbelief. She was staring at those papers like they might spontaneously combust if she looked at them hard enough. But what about my money?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas consulted his computer screen and delivered the final blow with the enthusiasm of someone reading a grocery list. "According to our records, there are no accounts in your name at this institution. The joint account was closed and transferred as per the signed agreement." That's when Clara apparently lost whatever composure she had left. She started arguing about lawyers and rights and how this had to be illegal somehow. She demanded to speak to Thomas's manager, then his manager's manager, then probably the bank president and the ghost of Alexander Hamilton if they'd been available. But the beautiful thing about banks is that they don't care about your feelings. They care about signatures, dates, and legal documents. And all of those things were lined up against Clara like a firing squad at dawn. Thomas offered her a glass of water, probably because she was starting to look like she might faint. She should have asked for something stronger, because the water wasn't going to help with what came next. "Is there anything else I can help you with today?" Thomas asked, which was banker speak for, "Please leave before you make more of a scene." Clara just sat there, staring at the papers that had her own signature on them, probably wondering how someone could be stupid enough to sign away their financial future while watching reality TV. The answer, of course, was very easily, especially when you trust someone you think is too boring to be dangerous. You know what they say about assumptions? They make an ass out of you and me. But in Clara's case, they just made an ass out of her, which was honestly more entertaining for everyone involved. After her spectacular failure at the bank, Clara apparently decided to retreat to her little love nest with Simon, probably thinking she'd lick her wounds in private and figure out her next move. Too bad I'd already figured out her next 10 moves and prepared accordingly. According to my sources, and yes, I have sources, because 14 years of marriage teaches you to cultivate information networks like a discount CIA agent. Clara showed up at Simon's apartment building around 4:30 p.m., looking like she'd been hit by a financial truck driven by Karma herself. The apartment was in one of those trendy downtown complexes that tries really hard to be fancy, but ends up looking like a glorified college dorm with better lighting. You know the type: exposed brick walls, industrial fixtures, and rent prices that make you wonder if the landlord thinks they're leasing space on the International Space Station. Clara climbed 3 flights of stairs, because of course Simon lived in a walk-up, probably to stay grounded, or some other philosophical nonsense that really just meant he couldn't afford the elevator building down the street. She was carrying what looked like an overnight bag and wearing the kind of defeated expression you see on people's faces when they realize their lottery ticket is 1 number off. But here's where the story gets really good. Because as Clara approached the door to apartment 3B, the door that was supposed to represent her fresh start and new beginning, she noticed something that probably made her stomach drop faster than a lead balloon in a gravity contest. There, taped to the door like a bright yellow beacon of doom, was an official notice. Not a package delivery slip, not a note from a neighbor, but one of those legal documents that makes your blood pressure spike just by existing. Notice to vacate premises ***. Lease terminated for non-payment ***. Tenant must vacate within 48 hours ***. By order of MW Properties LLC ***. MW Properties LLC. Those 3 little letters that might as well have been my signature on Clara's eviction notice. Because guess who owned the building? Guess who had purchased it 6 months ago through a shell company while Clara was busy planning her romantic escape? That's right. Your boy Michael had been playing 3-dimensional chess while Clara was still trying to figure out checkers. Clara stood there staring at that notice like it was written in hieroglyphics. She probably read it 3 times, each time hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something less catastrophic. But legal documents are stubborn that way. They tend to say exactly what they mean, especially when they're backed by property ownership records and a very thorough legal team. The door opened, and out came Simon, chewing on what looked like a sandwich made from disappointment and poor life choices. He took one look at Clara's face, then at the notice, then back at Clara's face, and you could practically see the wheels turning in his head at about the speed of a broken shopping cart. "What's that?" Simon asked, pointing at the notice like it might be some kind of elaborate prank. Clara handed him the paper with the kind of careful precision people use when they're handling live explosives. Simon read it once, twice, and then looked up at Clara with an expression that suggested his brain was having trouble processing this new information. "Wait," Simon said, his voice carrying that special tone people use when they're about to ask a question they really don't want the answer to. "Your husband owns this place?" And there it was. The moment when Simon realized he hadn't just stolen another man's wife. He'd moved into another man's property. It was like finding out you'd been bragging about robbing a bank that was actually owned by the police department. Clara's response was apparently a masterclass in damage control gone wrong. According to my sources, she started explaining about joint assets and how everything was supposed to be split 50-50 and how this was all just some terrible misunderstanding that would be cleared up as soon as she talked to her lawyer. But Simon wasn't buying it. You could see it in his face, that dawning realization that the woman he'd thought was his ticket to the good life might actually be his ticket to financial ruin. He'd left his wife for Clara, assuming she came with half of a nice suburban lifestyle. Instead, he was looking at eviction notices and legal problems that had his name all over them. "How did he know where I lived?" Simon asked, which was honestly a pretty good question. Too bad the answer was, "Because I've known about this affair for 6 months, and you're both terrible at being subtle." Clara didn't have a good answer for that one. She probably mumbled something about coincidences and bad luck, but Simon wasn't stupid, just horny and greedy, which is a dangerous combination, but not necessarily the same thing as stupid. That's when Clara probably realized that her safe haven wasn't so safe. The apartment she'd been using for romantic rendezvous, the place where she'd planned to start her new life, the sanctuary where she thought she could escape the consequences of her actions, it all belonged to me. She hadn't escaped the fortress. She'd just moved into the guest room of my empire. Even her rebellion was happening on property I owned, under lease agreements I controlled, with security deposits I could keep and references I could ruin. Simon looked at the notice again, probably calculating how much money he didn't have and how many legal problems he couldn't afford. Then he looked at Clara, and you could practically see him doing the math. Cheating wife plus angry husband plus eviction notice equals time to cut his losses and run. "This is insane," Simon muttered. which was probably the most accurate thing he'd said since this whole mess started. How are we supposed to fight someone who owns everything? Clara didn't have an answer for that either, because the truth was, you can't fight someone who's been preparing for war while you were busy taking selfies. You can't outmaneuver someone who's 3 steps ahead when you're still trying to figure out what game you're playing. I imagined Clara standing there in that hallway, holding her overnight bag and staring at an eviction notice with my company's name on it, finally understanding that there was no escape hatch, no safe space, no corner of her life that I hadn't already anticipated and prepared for. The apartment building, the bank accounts, the car, the house, it was all connected, all part of a web that I'd been spinning for months while she'd been busy playing house with a guy who looked like he'd been chain-smoking since the Carter administration. There's something uniquely devastating about watching your own child realize that one of their parents is a complete fraud. It's like watching someone discover that Santa Claus isn't real, except instead of just ruining Christmas, it ruins your entire perception of someone you're supposed to trust unconditionally. And let me tell you, when that realization hits an 18-year-old college sophomore who inherited her mother's dramatic flair but her father's analytical brain, things get interesting real fast. Haley called me at 9:47 p.m. on Friday, exactly 3 days after Clara's apartment discovery and about 6 hours after what I can only assume was a very uncomfortable mother-daughter phone conversation. My daughter had always been smart, Dean's List smart, full scholarship to state smart, sees through your bullshit from 3 states away smart. But tonight, her voice carried that particular tone that meant someone was about to get intellectually eviscerated. "Dad?" she said without any preamble, because Haley had never been one for small talk when there was drama to dissect. "Mom called me crying about how you froze her accounts and left her with nothing. She says you're being vindictive and cruel and that you've basically stolen everything from her." I leaned back in my recliner, remote in one hand, beer in the other, and prepared for what was going to be either a very short conversation or a very long one, depending on how much Clara had actually told our daughter. "She also says," Haley continued, and I could hear that dangerous edge creeping into her voice, the one she'd inherited from her mother but learned to weaponize from watching me, "that you're trying to turn me against her and that none of this is her fault because she was emotionally neglected in your marriage." Emotionally neglected. That was rich, coming from someone who'd been emotionally neglecting her own marriage while planning champagne toasts with her ex-boyfriend. But I didn't say that. Instead, I took a sip of my beer and asked the question I'd been waiting 3 days to ask. "Have you checked Section 12 of the post-nup agreement in your Dropbox?" Silence. The kind of silence that means someone is either thinking really hard or accessing cloud storage. Haley had always been the keeper of our family's important documents, partly because she was organized, partly because she was studying business administration, and partly because I'd been preparing for this exact moment for over a year. "Give me a minute," she said, and I could hear typing in the background. "I'm pulling it up now." I waited, counting the seconds and imagining Haley's face as she read through clauses and subclauses that her mother had signed without reading. The postnup wasn't just a legal document. It was a roadmap of consequences, a choose-your-own-adventure book where Clara had unknowingly chosen the path labeled total financial destruction. "Holy shit, Dad," Haley breathed, and I didn't even correct her language because the situation definitely called for profanity. "She signed this. All of this. The abandonment clause, the infidelity provisions, the asset transfer agreements. Every page," I confirmed, "initialed and notarized." "But..." Haley's voice trailed off, and I could practically hear her brain processing the implications. "Dad, this basically says that if she cheats or leaves you for someone else, she forfeits everything. Everything." And she signed it willingly. While watching The Bachelor, I added, because details matter and Clara's casual attitude toward legal documents had always been a source of fascination for our detail-oriented daughter. There was another pause, longer this time, and when Haley spoke again, her voice had shifted from confused to something much more dangerous, disappointed and angry. "Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Shoot. Has Mom been cheating on you?" This was the moment I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. Haley deserved the truth, but the truth was going to shatter whatever illusions she had left about her mother. On the other hand, Clara had already started this conversation by painting me as the villain, So the truth was probably the only weapon I had left. Check your email, I said. I'm sending you some screenshots. I forwarded Haley the same evidence package I'd sent to Tyler Preston, the champagne selfie with timestamp, the credit card statements showing romantic dinners for two, the text messages between Clara and Michelle about keeping secrets, and the bank surveillance footage of Clara and Simon at the ATM. I gave her 10 minutes to review everything. 10 minutes to watch her mother's carefully constructed narrative collapse like a house of cards in a hurricane. 10 minutes to realize that everything Clara had told her about emotional neglect and vindictive husbands was just elaborate fiction designed to hide the fact that she'd been planning her exit strategy while funding it with family money. When Haley called back, she was crying. But these weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of rage, the kind of crying that happens when you realize someone you love has been lying to your face for months. "Dad," she said through gritted teeth, "tell me you have more." More what? More evidence. More ammunition. More ways to make sure she can't weasel out of this. That's my girl. Analytical, thorough, and absolutely ruthless when someone violated her sense of justice. I'd raised her to be fair but not naive, trusting but not stupid. And right now, she was channeling every lesson I'd ever taught her about consequences and accountability. "Actually," I said, pulling up another folder on my laptop, "there's something else you should see." I forwarded her the final piece of evidence. Text messages between Clara and Michelle from 2 weeks ago. Messages I'd obtained through methods that were completely legal, but probably morally questionable. The messages where Clara had discussed what would happen if something happened to me, and how Haley would inherit everything and she'd share anyway, because she's always been a daddy's girl. Clara hadn't just been planning to leave me. She'd been planning for my hypothetical death and counting on our daughter's loyalty to give her access to inheritance money that legally wouldn't belong to her. The silence after I sent those screenshots was deafening. When Haley finally spoke, her voice was ice cold. She was planning on using me. Looks that way. She was going to manipulate me into giving her money if you died. That appears to be the plan. Another pause, and then, "Dad, I'm never speaking to her again." That hit me harder than I'd expected. I'd wanted Clara to face consequences for her actions, but I'd never wanted to destroy Haley's relationship with her mother. Despite everything, Clara was still her mom, and some bonds are supposed to be unbreakable. "Haley, honey, you don't have to." "No, Dad," she interrupted, and her voice was steel wrapped in velvet. "You don't get it. She didn't just cheat on you. She didn't just steal from you. She was planning to use me as her backup plan. She was going to manipulate my grief and my love for you to get money that wouldn't even legally belong to her." I heard her take a shaky breath. "That's not just betraying you, Dad. That's betraying me too. And I'm done." Clara had always thought blood was thicker than contracts, that family loyalty would trump legal documents and evidence. She'd counted on Haley's love and trust to be her safety net. Turns out, truth beats both blood and contracts. And our daughter had just chosen her side. You know what they say about revenge being a dish best served cold? Well, Simon was about to get a 5-course meal that had been chilling in my legal freezer for months. And let me tell you, this particular feast was going to give him indigestion for the rest of his natural life. Simon had been living in blissful ignorance for exactly 6 days since Clara's dramatic exit from our marriage. 6 whole days of thinking he'd won the lottery, scored the jackpot, and stolen the prize right out from under the boring suburban husband's nose. He probably spent those days feeling pretty damn good about himself, walking around with that swagger guys get when they think they've pulled off the heist of the century. Too bad for Simon. He'd actually just walked into the most elaborate legal trap I'd ever constructed, and the jaws were about to snap shut with the force of 14 years of careful planning and about 6 months of very specific preparation. It was Tuesday morning, 10:15 a.m. to be exact, when the doorbell rang at Simon's new temporary address, a crappy motel on the outskirts of town where he'd been staying since the apartment eviction. The Sunset Lodge, which looked like it hadn't seen a sunset or any other form of natural beauty since the Carter administration. The kind of place where you pay by the week and try not to think too hard about what those stains on the carpet might be. Simon answered the door in what I can only imagine was his relaxing at a Fleabag motel outfit, probably sweatpants with mysterious stains and a t-shirt that had seen better decades. He was expecting maybe the maid service or Clara with coffee and apologies, or possibly just someone who'd gotten lost and needed directions to somewhere with better hygiene standards. Instead, he got Marcus Williams, professional process server and part-time bodybuilder who looked like he could bench press a small car without breaking a sweat. Marcus was wearing his standard uniform, black polo shirt, black slacks, and an expression that suggested he'd delivered bad news to tougher guys than Simon and lived to tell about it. "Simon Reynolds?" Marcus asked, though it was really more of a statement than a question. He already knew exactly who he was looking at, because I'd provided him with photographs, current address, and a detailed description that included Simon's unfortunate habit of chain-smoking Marlboros and his tendency to wear clothes that had given up on life. "Yeah," Simon replied, probably thinking this was some kind of sales call or maybe a survey about his motel experience. "What do you want?" That's when Marcus smiled, the kind of smile that meant someone's day was about to take a hard left turn into Lawsuit City. He reached into his leather messenger bag and pulled out an envelope that was thick enough to choke a horse and official enough to make grown men weep. "You've been served," Marcus said with the kind of professional cheerfulness that comes from years of ruining people's mornings. He handed Simon the envelope, took a quick photo for his records, and walked away whistling something that sounded suspiciously like "Another One Bites the Dust." Simon stood there in his doorway, holding the envelope like it might explode if he moved too quickly. He probably stared at his name typed on the front, trying to process how someone he'd never met could know where he was staying and why they were delivering legal documents to a guy who was just trying to enjoy his romantic victory lap. The envelope was heavy, not just thick paper heavy, but heavy with the weight of impending financial doom. Inside were court documents that had been prepared with the kind of meticulous attention to detail that would make a Swiss watchmaker jealous. The lawsuit was a thing of beauty, really. A legal masterpiece that covered every possible angle and anticipated every potential defense. Peterson v. Reynolds ***. Civil action for damages ***. Count I. Fraud and misrepresentation ***. Count 2. Unjust enrichment ***. Count 3. Property interference ***. Count 4. Conspiracy to defraud ***. Each count was backed up by evidence that would make a prosecutor weep with joy. The champagne selfie that proved premeditation. The text messages between Clara and Simon planning their fresh start while she was still married to me. The credit card statements showing romantic dinners charged to accounts that Simon knew damn well weren't his. The bank surveillance footage of him accessing ATMs with Clara, using cards that had both our names on them. But the real crown jewel was count 3, property interference. See, Simon had been living in my apartment building for 3 months, paying rent to Clara instead of to the actual property management company. Clara had been collecting his rent money and pocketing it while the real rent went unpaid, which meant Simon had been unknowingly participating in a fraud scheme that had his signature all over the fake lease agreements. Simon probably read through those documents like a man watching his own execution. Every page laid out another way he'd screwed himself, another piece of evidence that showed he wasn't just some innocent guy who'd fallen in love with the wrong woman. He'd actively participated in spending money that wasn't his, living in property that wasn't available, and planning a future funded by assets that legally belonged to someone else. The damages section was particularly beautiful. I was seeking compensation for every dollar Clara had spent on their relationship, every dinner, every gift, every hotel room, every piece of lingerie that had never made it home to our bedroom, plus interest, plus punitive damages, plus attorney fees, plus the cost of investigating their affair. The total came to $347,892.16. Not exactly pocket change for a guy who was currently living in a motel that probably charged extra for clean towels. Simon's first call was probably to Clara, because guys like Simon always assume the woman has some kind of plan when everything goes sideways. But Clara's phone had been going straight to voicemail since Haley had stopped speaking to her, and she was probably hiding in whatever hole she'd managed to crawl into after the apartment eviction. His second call was to a lawyer, specifically James Morrison, Esquire, who had the misfortune of taking Simon's case and the intelligence to recognize a lost cause when he saw one. Morrison spent exactly 47 minutes reviewing the evidence package before calling Simon back with news that was somehow even worse than the original lawsuit. "Mr. Reynolds, Morrison said in the tone lawyers use when they're about to explain why you're completely fucked. This isn't about love triangles or relationship drama. This is financial fraud. You've been charged as an accessory to multiple felonies, and the evidence is overwhelming. Simon apparently asked about his chances of winning, which Morrison described as somewhere between slim and non-existent, leaning heavily toward non-existent. Then came the questions about Clara, about whether she could help with legal fees or testimony or anything that might make this nightmare go away. Morrison's response was probably the best part of the whole conversation. Mr. Reynolds, Morrison explained, your co-defendant appears to have fled the jurisdiction and abandoned all communication. Even if we could locate her, her testimony would only strengthen the plaintiff's case. Simon had left his wife for Clara, thinking he was upgrading to a better life with a woman who came with built-in financial security. Instead, he'd traded a stable marriage for a lawsuit that was going to follow him around like a financial haunting for the rest of his life. The best part? Clara wasn't even returning his texts anymore. There's something beautifully poetic about the way karma delivers its final invoice. Not with thunder and lightning, not with dramatic courtroom scenes or explosive confrontations, but with a simple white envelope sitting in a mailbox like an ordinary Tuesday morning surprise. Clara's reckoning arrived exactly 3 weeks after her grand exit, hand-delivered by the Postal Service with the same casual efficiency they use for utility bills and grocery store coupons. Clara had been staying at her sister Janet's house in Phoenix. You know, the sister who'd always thought I was too controlling and had spent 14 years encouraging Clara to find herself and follow her heart. Janet's spare bedroom had become Clara's refugee camp, complete with boxes of belongings she'd managed to salvage and a growing collection of empty wine bottles that suggested the reality of her situation was starting to sink in. The envelope was completely unremarkable. Plain white, standard size, no return address except for the law offices of Mitchell and Associates, the trust administrators who handled the more delicate aspects of my financial planning. No certified mail, no signature required, just a regular piece of mail that might as well have been a credit card offer or a magazine subscription renewal. But inside that ordinary envelope was Clara's death certificate. Not literally, of course, but the legal equivalent, an irrevocable dissolution notice that officially terminated every safety net, every backup plan, and every last hope she might have had for salvaging something from the wreckage of her marriage. Clara probably opened it while drinking her morning coffee, maybe sitting at Janet's kitchen table, surrounded by the debris of her new life. The letter was written in that special language lawyers use when they want to sound official, but not unnecessarily cruel. Professional, efficient, and absolutely final. Notice of irrevocable trust dissolution ***. Effective date. The exact moment she said, I never loved you. ***. Beneficiary status. Terminated ***. Asset distribution. Complete ***. The beauty of the timing wasn't accidental. Every legal maneuver, every financial transfer, every carefully planned consequence had been triggered by Clara's own words during our anniversary dinner. She hadn't just confessed to an affair. She'd spoken the magic words that activated clauses she'd never bothered to read in documents she'd signed without thinking. The trust dissolution was the final domino in a chain reaction that had been building for years. Clara had always assumed that being married to me meant being entitled to half of everything I'd built, but she'd never bothered to understand how that entitlement could be legally structured. She'd signed papers that made her a conditional beneficiary, not an automatic one. And those conditions had very specific triggers. Abandonment, infidelity, premeditated deception. Each one carefully defined in legal language that left no room for interpretation or appeal. Clara had managed to hit the trifecta in a single evening, complete with social media documentation and witness testimony. The letter explained, in terms even Clara could understand, that her beneficiary status had been terminated the moment she walked out our front door. The house, the investments, the retirement accounts, the life insurance policies, everything that had been held in trust for Michael Peterson and spouse was now held in trust for Michael Peterson, individual. But the real gut punch was in the second paragraph, where the letter detailed exactly what Clara's affair had cost her. Not just the obvious stuff like the house and savings, but the things she'd probably never thought about. the country club membership she'd used for tennis lessons, the health insurance policy that covered her expensive dermatologist visits, the credit cards that were about to be canceled, the car insurance that was about to lapse because the car was now officially a company vehicle. Even her cell phone plan was about to be terminated because it had been part of our family package, and according to the trust documents, Clara was no longer family. Janet probably watched Clara read that letter, watched her face go through the same progression of emotions that had become familiar over the past 3 weeks. Confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally that hollow acceptance that comes when you realize you've been completely outmaneuvered by someone you thought was too boring to play chess. The letter also included a helpful timeline of Clara's financial future. Day 1, all accounts frozen. Day 7, credit cards canceled. Day 14, insurance policies terminated. Day 30, legal proceedings initiated for recovery of marital assets fraudulently transferred to third parties. That last part was about Simon, of course, and the fact that Clara had been funneling money to him for months through various creative accounting methods. Every romantic dinner, every weekend getaway, every gift she'd bought him with our joint credit card was now legally classified as theft, and the trust administrators were going to recover every penny with interest and penalties. But perhaps the most devastating part of the letter was the final paragraph, which explained that this dissolution was irrevocable and permanent. There would be no appeals, no negotiations, no second chances. Clara had made her choice during that salmon dinner, and now she got to live with the consequences for the rest of her life. Tyler Preston had vanished after that first phone call, probably because representing Clara had become a professional liability that no amount of money could justify. Simon had stopped returning her calls after his lawyer explained that associating with her made him look even more guilty of fraud. Even Michelle had gone radio silent after realizing that her social media comments had been used as evidence in legal proceedings. Clara was sitting alone in her sister's kitchen, staring at a legal document that explained in precise detail how she'd managed to destroy her entire life with 3 words and a champagne selfie. Her new boyfriend was facing a lawsuit that would bankrupt him. Her daughter wouldn't speak to her. Her friends had abandoned her after the scandal became public knowledge. Meanwhile, I was at home, streaming Netflix and eating takeout Chinese food from the good restaurant downtown, the one Clara always said was too expensive for regular dinner. The remote control was mine. The thermostat was set to exactly the temperature I wanted, and nobody was complaining about my choice of documentaries or my habit of eating ice cream straight from the container. Clara had gotten exactly what she'd asked for during that dinner. She'd said she never loved me, so now she didn't have to pretend anymore. She'd said she wanted to go back to her ex-lover, so now she was free to pursue that relationship without any financial distractions from our marriage. The only difference was that she'd expected to take half of everything with her, and instead she'd gotten exactly what she'd contributed to our financial partnership over the past 6 months. Absolutely nothing. I raised my beer in a toast to the empty house, to the perfectly quiet evening, and to the beautiful simplicity of a plan that had worked exactly as designed. Clara got nothing. I got the remote control. Fair trade.